Sam, thank you for delivering that again. Kabane has come, but I think, again, in the interest of saving time, maybe I'll have Kabane introduce Adunya in a couple of minutes. I am supposed to talk about one of the ideas that we propose as a solution going forward. But I don't think I can take the full 10 minutes that I had hoped I was going to get. In any case, let me
This session is supposed to have ended at 1:53, so I hope you're cognizant of that fact.
Well, yes,
we were minutes after 2 p.m.
Okay. So should I just maybe, yes, I'll summarize mine in 1 or 2 minutes and then pass it on to Adunya, if that's okay. Let me link let me share my, I think this is it. So I stopped here earlier talking about the problems in a positive sense. So this is, what can be done? Here we're proposing a common market as a solution going forward. I am not going to get into the history of how Europe fought endless wars for hundreds of years. And then, of course, all of a sudden, they learned a lesson after World War II and they decided to get together and sit around a table and discuss, chart a way forward. It all began in 1950 as the European Coal and Steel Community, which had 3 objectives: ending the wars, and integrating the European economies, the different nation states' economies, and eventually political integration. Let me just cite, because I so like it, Victor Hugo's prediction in 1849. He predicted that Europe would, in Europe, the only battle of fields in Europe will be markets opening to trade and minds opening up to ideas. We can safely assume that his prediction has come true, but of course, European nations are happy to duke it out on soccer pitch and other sporting events without involving their fearsome national armies. So that's essentially what we desire to see. I'm not going to give you how the European common market evolved. There's a rich set of literature here as well. I'll just skip. Let me make this point. Notwithstanding Brexit and the Euroskeptics, so-called Euroskeptics projections, remarkable progress has been made in establishing the European market in goods, services, capital, and labor, so-called the 4 freedoms. And of course, it's also the case, it has been documented that there has been significant convergence in terms of price convergence and wage convergence in Europe, in the member states, okay? And this is consistent with economic theory. Now, what is the lesson for Ethiopia? Nothing we've tried has worked. Nothing that has been tried has worked. Communism, before that, the imperial regime, developmental state, and now the Medemar argument. It has been so costly, as I argued in the first part, has been so costly to maintain the Ethiopian imperial project, really imperial project. Ethiopia, as it's actually happening, is disintegrating and different ethno-national states are emerging, with Tigray and Oromia leading the way, in my opinion. The emerging states have certain basic institutions that can be developed further, to organize important aspects of their national affairs. Okay? And this, of course, requires, or ideally, this would come through a negotiated dissolution of some of the existing institutional frameworks that have forced the Ethiopian nations into what I call unhappy and unequal union. So the dissolution of Ethiopia into its more natural components will face, yes, significant hurdles. There might be conflicts over resources, territorial claims, perhaps even score settling for injustices or past injustices. But if a negotiated dissolution can be, we can have that, that's where the experience of the EU comes into sharp focus. Okay? And the common market idea that I'm proposing here will essentially allow the emerging nation states to blunt the future destructive wars that may come about if, the process, a parallel process can be launched as the dissolution of Ethiopia takes place, preferably through negotiations. If a common market idea can be pushed and that can be implemented, we can blunt future destructive wars between the nation states. It could also serve as a main chief vehicle to improve the living standards of all people in the Union. Again, there are a number of institutions that need to be dismantled, Ethiopian institutions, but some may have to be tweaked and maintained to support the common market idea, one of which is an idea of common currency. That's where Arduino comes in to talk about that for the next few minutes. Thank you. Arduino, you take it from here. Perhaps, Kabane, if you could step in for a minute, introduce yourself and then say a few words about Arduino, or do you have his information in front of you? Just say a few words about yourself and we screwed up.
Thank you, Tafari. I'm very sorry. Really apologize for some technical issues that has happened. I was supposed to moderate this, but I don't want to take more time. So now I'll give the floor directly to Dr. Arduino Olani, who will be presenting on a common currency as a solution and way forward. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. I'm so glad to hear and listen to seniors about self-determination, about the Baro Tumsa, about this inauguration as well. Dr. Tafari was speaking on an economic integration, and the key word that follows that is and just that. Common currency and okay, the Abyssinian-made Ethiopian empire is disintegrating, and it should be clear to everyone that it's happening just right in front of us. And hopefully, if possible, and if there could be a way, a smarter way, a beneficiary way, that this disintegration is not too violent, and if common market that Dr. Tafari was saying works, and there would be some sort of negotiated disintegration. In that scenario, a common currency and monetary union we don't, and just that. I mean, when I say just that, no political union, but just economic union like the European Union that was being said could be beneficiary, and there are pros and cons to that, and I will be explaining that in my limited time. In the independent states like European Union, economies can integrate. Of course, we are going backwards. And the key that I want to emphasize is nothing more than that. The states can integrate economically, and I'm just hoping for a smooth transition to the independent states. Regional currency area typically happens when there is a strong sense of regional solidarity and institutional manifestations of that. Do we have that? No, we are just trying a new experiment, because it's clear that there is no not strong sense of regional solidarity in the Abyssinian-made Ethiopian empire. But in Europe, for example, the union was pursued because there was strong economic linkage, and there was democracy, and there is similarity in many aspects. Now, in our case, we are hoping for a smooth transition to a common market, the currency union, in which independent states from the empire form their own states and have a common market, and that could be beneficiary as long as the market is stable. The market can be beneficial to everyone if any state is interested. So in the European Union type states, having a currency union has a problem too. For example, there would not be independent monetary policy. A country may want to have the union as a state want to tailor its own policy in the way it wants, but when there is a union, a currency union or economic integration, and existence of monetary policy, the monetary policy is limited because it is centralized. So now here is the question during this integration of the empire. Do the benefits of there is credibility in currency union, there is credibility, predictability, and stability of the macroeconomic framework. This exists. But does this benefit help or is it greater than the cost associated with the inability to tailor monetary policy for yourself as a state? That is a decision by the union states. Now, we are thinking further away the steps after the disintegration that is happening right in front of us. So what are the situations under which currency union and economic integration, only that, no political, none other ways exist? What are possibilities? You forgo your potential of creating your own national currency. All states, all independent states forgo that, but there will be labor mobility, and to be successful, typically what has happened is there is labor mobility, existence of fiscal transfers, symmetry of shocks. When we say symmetry of shocks, that means if there is a bad weather that happens all along all the states, and diversified industrial structure is such that one of the states would be providing some sort of a product that is sold in the entire integrated market. And these are the basics that are good, that are necessary to have an economic integration. What does this look like in Ethiopian states, Ethiopian empire? Okay, there is labor mobility, typically from north to south. Fiscal transfers, there is some formal fiscal transfers by the government. I hear about those news these days. There is symmetry of shocks. This could be a possibility. But this also needs one key thing: trust. The states that economically integrate but politically disintegrate and have their own independent states, they need a trust, a centralized monetary policy that allows for trust between the states. Is this a possibility? It is open question. But the other typical things that could happen in a currency union type states is a loss of seniority. And now this also comes to the trust issue. The politics of mistrust is the key ingredient, the key problem in the Ethiopian empire. Of course, mistrust was what it was founded on. So loss of seniority means that if there is independent states that have a common currency, they probably will have one currency, and that should be printed somewhere. And who prints that? And the benefit.
1 minute, Dunya, just a minute.
1 minute, okay. And there will be the other benefit with currency union, on the other hand, is Africans exercise monetary flexibility in harmful fashion, and that could be mitigated through a currency union. Let me conclude. If we have to think and fathom about the idea of regional currency that is being thought even in Africa. Africa is also, throughout Africa, there is the idea of this regional currency union. It could be beneficiary. And while these independent states are created of the Ethiopian empire, this could be something that should be thought of. Maybe currency union, economic union, trading could provide an easy, smoother good buying of each state from the brutal empire oppression and the unhappy, unequal union that Dr. Tamari was saying. Just this is a point to add to. Thank you, everyone.
Galatomi, I'll just pass it on to Kabane to wrap this up. There will not be any Q&As, unfortunately, because we're running behind time, but we will be saving some time as we go on, so please bear with us, those who are coming after this. It's you, Kabane, just wrap it up for us, and then
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much to all our presenters, and also for those of you who are still sticking with us. So generally what we have been attending so far under this segment is on the impact of ethnic polarization on Ethiopia's economic progress and how that is impacting the whole economic performance of Ethiopia. And then based on that, as Dr. Samuel reflected on the insight from identity economics, and then as a solution to remedy this gap in Ethiopia, Dr. Tafari and Dr. Adunya has shared with us their insight on common market and the possibility of common currency going forward. And this has been what this segment touched upon, and we are very thankful to all of you that has been with us. And I really apologize for the technical error that has happened at the beginning. So thank you. I'll close this session on this. Thank you very much.
Okay. Can I come in?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Thank you very much. We really appreciate. I don't want to take more time. We now move straight to the right to self-determination, the next session, by no other than Mr. John Young, who is very familiar face to Ethiopians. He has written a paper on at least something that I know very well about the TPLF, the famous TPLF of Ethiopia. And over to you, Mr. John, on self-determination in Ethiopia. Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Baro,
Let me take
if I may.
step back. Take over Talile. I'm sorry. I overthrew you and took over your position. And instead of handing it over to you, I'm sorry.
It's okay. Before we start, I would like to see if you can hear Dr. John. If somebody can unmute Dr. John for me, that I appreciate it. Dr. John, can you test your connection and say something? Okay. So if we cannot hear him, I will call him. He's on vacation right now. I'll call him through my phone, and that way we'll decide if we can all hear him. He was texting me. He has some technical difficulty earlier. So let me.
Can I say something, Talile?
Yes.
He may be unmuted. That could be why we're not hearing him. But else it could be also a problem that you just mentioned. Can you unmute yourself, John?
He cannot unmute himself. So I asked the host if they can unmute him, please.
He has to accept the invite to unmute. I can't physically unmute him.
Okay, the host cannot. Okay, he does not have that capability for some reason. He's only seeing a black screen. So just give me about 30 seconds. Let me dial his phone right now. I'll mute myself. Okay, I have Dr. John over the phone, and I apologize for the technical difficulty. First, I'd like to, I'm so honored to introduce Dr. John. John is a Canadian who wrote his PhD dissertation in political science on how the TPLF mobilized the peasant population of Tigray during the armed struggle. Based on that study, he subsequently wrote his Cambridge University published book, Peasant Revolution in Ethiopia, from 1975 to 1991. He taught in the Political Science International Relations Department of Addis Ababa University for 2 years, worked for the Canadian Embassy in Addis Ababa on Ethiopia regional government, and has long had an interest in the TPLF and national federalism. John worked as a consultant for the Canadian government on the Sudan peace process and held a variety of positions in the Horn, journalist in Khartoum, peace monitor in Sudan, North-South War, consultant for many agencies, resource person for IGAD, and he served as a political advisor to the Carter Center for the 2010 Sudanese national election and the 2011 referendum on South Sudan's separation. This work provided the basis for 2 books on Sudan peace process and the South Sudan civil war. John's most recent studies were on Sudan-Ethiopian relations and on the 2019 Sudan uprising. He recently co-wrote 2 books on the failure of the Western nation state in the Horn of Africa, which is published, and on the failure of Western democracy in the Horn. This work has convinced them that Ethiopians should find their own way forward and not be undoubtedly influenced by Western experience. So it's an honor for me to introduce John Young for his presentation on the right to self-determination in Ethiopia. Thank you. John, you may take the floor. Okay.
Can you just confirm that you can hear me?
I can hear you. I would like to confirm if the other can hear him. Can you say a word or two?
Yes.
Yeah. I just wanted to know if you
Okay. They can hear you.
can hear me. Okay, good. Okay, great. I apologize for the problem. I'm at my cabin in the bush, and unfortunately the internet connection is very poor. But I appreciate the honor of being invited to participate in this conference, because I am neither an Oromo nor a scholar of Oromo studies. So I feel quite honored that you would consider me to speak here. Now, I've been asked to speak on national self-determination, which I can't imagine a topic that's actually more complex and not really amenable to being considered within the time frame that I've been given. But what I want to look at is the issue of national self-determination, not so much internally within Ethiopia, because that's been mentioned a few times by other speakers who've talked about these struggles ongoing in Ethiopia long before the EPRDF came to government. But what I do want to talk about is more the international influences on that of national self-determination, particularly as it informed the EPRDF and as it informed the Ethiopian constitution and the system of national federalism. So I want to step back a bit, and I think that might be a little more useful for your audience who are eminently familiar with the notion of national self-determination in Ethiopia. So if you step back and look at national that's conceived national context and in the modern period, you end up with American President Woodrow Wilson in the early years of the 20th century, who popularized this idea and in fact enthused a lot of intellectuals from the third world by these ideas. And he took this notion of national self-determination conference after the First World War. But what became clear very quickly is that when Vietnamese intellectual by the name of Ho Chi Minh tried to approach Woodrow Wilson and convince him views on the need for national self-determination in Vietnam, Woodrow Wilson would not see him. And in fact, it was made very clear at the conference that when one spoke about national self-determination, it was meant Western nation considered civilized nation. In fact, I've only been able to find one non-white person who attended the conference. That was W.E. Du Bois, the American activist, and there was one that attended, and that was Japan. And both those groups, or the individual and group, tried of racial equality onto the agenda and were completely rejected. So at the end of the day, it was made very clear that national self-determination did not apply to the colonized people of the world. Now, most people know a fair amount about the Versailles Conference. It's in all. What they don't know is that at almost the same time, in fact, it was only a year later, in 2020, there was a conference held in Baku, Azerbaijan, and it was actually organized by the incoming Bolshevik Soviet government. And one of the first things that government did was pass a declaration on the rights of peoples of Russia. And that was November 15, 1917. It's not very well. But within the Tsarist and that all the peoples of Ethiopia would sovereignty, they would all be granted self-determination, and that included unlike the Versailles Conference, of the attendees at the conference were not whites. They were, in fact, mostly Asian and mostly Muslim. And again, they affirmed the right of all people to national self-determination and launched what amounted to, I think the term used at the time was setting the East on fire, which meant essentially the subjugated people, Asia. So those ideas, as I said, were drawn from the early experience of the Soviet Union, but the Soviet Union didn't get those ideas that were being populated or populated the socialist movement for probably 50, 60 years before. And the context is one that Ethiopians of various it was socialists looking at the national democratic revolutions in Britain, France, Germany, Italy, and the experience of the settler states, but United States, Australia, New Zealand, and that experience was one and simply elimination of a whole host of national communities. So it was a response to that and the horror that people saw that informed the early Soviet government and also informed the Baku conference. So that's where those ideas came from. And I think one can see the relevance of that, of how they were carried forward to the Ethiopian student movement of the late 60s and 70s. But the next movement of national self-determination took place immediately after the Second World War with the decolonization and in Africa. Now, the way this is sometimes presented in the history books is one that this is not morally acceptable to have colonies and subjugate people in foreign lands. But in fact, that wasn't the reality at all. Decolonization came about because the Western countries, notably Britain and France, but also Germany, Italy, had been devastated by the Second World War and had little option to give up their colonies. Furthermore, they faced United States, which was then the dominant power, And the United States was opposed to these colonies simply because it did not want barriers for itself, politically and economically, to get into these colonies. But most of all, and this is not often appreciated, is that the real fear of the colonial powers was that if they opposed the decolonization movements in Africa and Asia, it would be faced with wars of independence, and those wars of independence would be supported by the Eastern Bloc, and they would end up with socialism in wide areas of Africa and Asia. So that was actually the background to it. So when these states got their independence, they went, of course, immediately, it becomes a kind of natural process for them to go into the United Nations, accepted as members of the General Assembly. But it was made then very clear that there still remained a hierarchy of states, because over top of the General Assembly, of course, is the Security Council. So the Africans and Asians who had gone through this process of decolonization quickly realized that their independence was very circumscribed by the political and economic realities of the world they went into. And of course, the term that was used was neocolonialism. And we don't hear that term very much anymore, but the reality is still very much the same. It's continued on till the present. Now, these ideas, as much as the internal developments within Ethiopia in 60s and 70s, and the Ethiopian student movement in its, I appreciate right now, to some people who are almost certainly members of that group, understood the nature of neocolonialism. They were also of the hierarchy of states nationally, and they were also anti-imperialist. I've talked to many of that generation and know how much they were impacted by the struggles, particularly in Vietnam. But in the early phase of the Ethiopian student uppermost, what was uppermost was ridding the country of this backward feudal regime and modernizing the country. And many of the members of the early Ethiopian student movement could be broadly considered Ethiopian nationalists, or certainly the people who dominated that movement. But the national self-determination could not long be put off, because Ethiopia was facing a growing insurrection in Eritrea. So the Ethiopian student movement had to confront that reality and come to a position. And the first perspective that they had on it was that since Ethiopia was a feudal country, it could not have colonies. Such was the Marxist understanding, and therefore they rejected initially. But obviously in time, the student movement overcame that and came to a position of not only recognizing national self-determination for Eritreans, but for all of the peoples Ethiopia. And that became a defining position, and of course has had enormous influence on the entire unfolding politics ever since. This change came about for essentially two things. One was the increasing influence of Marxism-Leninism on the Ethiopian student movement, and also the experience the early Soviet Union, which not only provided kind of inspiration of overthrowing a state, but there was also the view that there was much to be learned from the feudal state of Russia Because Ethiopia and Russia, although in many ways very different, many similarities. They were both feudal states. They were both empire states. They were led by, were all heads of the Orthodox Church, and they also used the same kinds of mechanisms to constrain and develop their empire. Notably, in the case of Russia, by sending out Russians to the far reaches of the empire, where they basically controlled the subjugated people in a very, very similar fashion to the way So the language that you will see of the Ethiopian student movement is remarkably similar. In fact, it's in many cases to that used by the Bolsheviks in this period. So the Bolsheviks spoke as that the main focus of their concern and their campaign was against what they called Greater Russian chauvinism. And they spoke of the Tsarist Empire as being a prison of nationalities, both terms of which were completely adopted by the Ethiopian student movement and the subsequent liberation movement. So as the Bolsheviks proceeded with this, they focused on eliminating or challenging Russian chauvinism and popularizing the idea of national self-determination up to and including the right of secession of the country. And again, the Ethiopian movement followed that. What was a crucial difference, and I'll get back to this in a minute, is that the Bolsheviks were not by nature not. What they saw was a rising nationalism in the empire, an abhorrence of forcing people into a narrow-based nation state, which they weren't going to fit into comfortably. But this was an instrument as a way forward to then achieving the ideal of socialism.
Hi, John. John, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, I can. We have about 4 minutes, so I just want to give you. Yes, I just want to give you that that time. We're about 4 minutes, but it's a very interesting discussion. Okay, you can continue.
I think I can try to wrap up in 4 minutes. Crucial to this approach of the Bolsheviks, which was going to be copied just verbatim by the EPRDF, was the notion of national federalism and setting up these kinds of national-based states. And the view of the Bolshevik leadership, Lenin, Trotsky particularly, was that if you could grant people the rights of national self-determination, if you could have systems of equality and sovereignty, and you respected the cultures of these people, they would not opt for secession. They would realize their rights.
Well, I think we might lost John. It says it's reconnected.
Out of the Ethiopian student movement. Have I got another minute here or not?
Yes, you do. We lost you for about like 3 seconds.
Okay, I'm sorry about all of this. Okay, I'll try to wrap up quickly because I realize my talk here is problematic because of the environment here. What I want to say in conclusion is that the Ethiopian student movement was entirely right, I think, to look at the early Bolshevik experience, because the alternative was the West, which has never, even this day, it fully accepted the idea of national self-determination. We only have to look at the world today. We can look at the cases of the secessionist movements in Catalonia, the Basque region, Scotland, and Ireland, and seeing that the rights of these people to national self-determination are consistently opposed. And I'm speaking to you right now from central British Columbia, where I'm in the lands, the traditional lands of the Chilcote. Canada has never self-determination either. So the West does not provide a model of the way forward. Those ideas of the early Bolshevik experience carried weight for the Ethiopian student movement and still have relevance now. Now, I'm only talking about because by the early Stalin was in complete control, and to a large extent he dismantled this system. Although even in the Constitution of 1930, which the Ethiopian Constitution in many ways modeled after, the rights of each national community to their own constitution was guaranteed, and the right to secession was guaranteed. Okay, maybe I should stop before I lose my connection here completely. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, John. Thank you so much for accommodating us while you are on vacation. So thank you. So I don't know if we have a time for Q&A, or we will move to the next speaker. I believe we are going to move to the next speaker. So I thank John, and I will drop in the chat room his recent book that everybody can access it for free. So thank you.
Thank you, Talile. I'm sorry we don't have time for Q&A, so we're going to move forward, and then I'm going to invite the next moderator, Angatu, to take us through the next session, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bahiro. This next session is on the topic of economic and political integration of the decolonized nations of Ethiopia. And we are joined by an esteemed speaker, Mr. Betena Hoteso, who comes from our neighboring Sidama nation, to share his perspective on this topic. It's an honor to host Mr. Betena at this inauguration event for the Baro Tumsa Institute. This sets the tone for the inclusive and cooperative mission of the Institute and will help to chart a path for the continued collaboration between our nations. Mr. Betena Hoteso holds a master's degree in economics from Ohio Wesley University. He worked as a teacher in different schools and colleges in Ethiopia. Mr. Betena has been significantly active in the Sidama people's struggle for self-determination since the time of Haile Selassie. He joined the Machat Ulama Self-Help Association, where he met Comrade Baro Tumsa. He collaborated clandestinely with Baro Tumsa while he was a member of the Ethiopian Chikunach Party, and then worked in the transitional government of Ethiopia in 1991. He was forced to flee the country as political conditions deteriorated, and is now living in London, continuing his participation in the Sidama people's struggle for self-determination. So with that, Mr. Betena, I'll hand over to you. The floor is yours. Mr. Betena, can you hear me? There may be a connection issue or something along those lines. I saw him in the room earlier.
And he too, he was in the room, just even when John was speaking. I don't know what happened.
Yeah.
I don't see him right now, do you? Okay.
I don't see him right now.
Interesting. Okay.
He could be having technical difficulties, so
My problem is I don't see him in the room.
that's what I mean.
Okay.
We should probably move on and
Yeah.
get to the next
Sure.
segment. Thanks.
Okay, Dr. Bahiro, I guess I'll hand back to you for the time being.
I thought we have Mr. Betna and Eso. No, both of them are not here. Mr. Betna. All right. It looks like both. I mean, I know both of them are in this room until a few minutes ago, so I can't explain exactly what happened. And I see the general attendance number down, so let me just give me 1 second. Okay. Let's move on. The next session is really the most important session of this event for obvious reason. The Baro Institute is honoring the heroes who sacrificed their life for freedom and justice for Oromo people. I am going to invite Maratu, who is the first moderator of the first speaker on this session, and ask all of the moderators to pass over to the other moderator when you are done with your sessions. So, Maratu, please.
We might have another problem. Maratu might be thinking that she's at work, by the way, and she might be thinking that her time is not yet. So,
okay, Angatu, will you be able to fill in for me? Angatu, are you gone? Okay, if Maratu is not there,
I'll share with
Dr. Bahiro, I'm still here.
Yeah. Will you be able to fill in for Maratu?
Yes, sure.
That would be great. Okay.
I don't have the bios of the speakers, unfortunately. So I think the best I could do is just introduce them by their name.
Okay. Just give me 1 second. Let me check with Howie if she would be able to share with you or Dr. Mua can quickly shoot to you. I think he has the bio. Do you, Dr. Mua?
Dr. Baro,
Yeah.
I think at this point, these are people well known as such. So I think she can go ahead and call the names and they can introduce themselves and continue with the conference.
Okay. Go ahead, Angatu.
Okay, so, well, actually, Maratu has just managed to share a Google Doc with me that has the bios in them. So I can use that. Thank you to Maratu. So I'll begin then. So this session is on the lives and legacies of Oromo thought leaders, and it will start with Baro Tumsa, the family perspective, which is being delivered by Adde Warke and or Ayetu. So first and foremost, I'd like to welcome Adde Warke and Adde Ayetu Baro Tumsa to present on the life and legacy of Baro Tumsa from the family perspective. So please, Adde Warke and Adde Ayetu, go ahead.
Akkam jirtu ulfaadhaa sagantaa kana kunoo akka kanatti waan Baroon jaalatu jalqabdanii jirtu. Kanaaf ulfinaan qaba isiniif jiraadha. Oromoon nuufaa jiraatu namni du'ee maqaan isaas wajjin awwaalamu. Itti aansee nuyi ani karaa kiyyaanii haadha manaa Baroo ta'uu kootiif baay'een boona. Namni homaa hin jedhin malee Waaqayyo nu gargaaree ijoollee 3 godhanne. Ijoolleen 3 tun immoo amma ijoollee 8 godhataniiru baay'anne. Yoo ijoolleellee kophaa guddisuun salphaa miti ta'eyyuu garuu keessa darbinee har'a geenyeerra Waaqayyo kanaaf hin galateeffanna. Iddoo kanaatiifis baay'ee Waaqayyo galateeffadha. Baroon nama waaqindeechuu jaalatudha. Organizeriidha. Oggaa qindeechuu immoo piroogiraamiidhaan godha. Kan dursisiisee kan itti aansu akkasuma itti aansee nama hojjetu waan ta'eef yoo rakkoon illee waan inni itti qophaa'e irratti narra ga'a jedhee too yaade isaaf hiika yeroo hundumaa lafa kaawwata. Nama sammuunsaa karaa baay'eedhaan gaggalagalchee too yaaduu danda'u waan tureef waan baay'een mijaa'eefii jira. Namoonnis baay'ee isa amanu duukaa ka'u waan inni jedhu dhaggeeffachuudhaaf yeroo hundumaa waan inni godhu wajjiniin hojjechuudhaaf yeroo hundumaa of kennu turani. Kuni baay'ee namatti tola. Baroon oggaa iddoo tokko hojiidhaaf dhaquu mootummaan isoo ergee yookiin sababa adda addaatiin bakka tokko dhaqee waa'ee Oromoo odoon ibsin biran darbu waa'ee Oromoo beeksisuu barbaada. Embaasiiwwanitti bara san namni poolitikaa badaa amma kanatti sirriitti hojjetu waan hin turreef Baroon bakka baay'eetti ergama ture yoo embaasii adda addaatti yeroo achitti ergamu waa'ee Oromoo akka gaariitti barsiisee biraa deema. Garuu jarri immoo infiroonfatu isaa fira godhatee gaamee galgala irbaata wajjin nyaannaa deebi'ii kootu jedhuuni ana wajjin yeroo baay'ee embaasii baay'ee dhaqneetoo irbaata embaasota keessatti wajjin yeroo dabarsineerraa kana dhugaan ba'a. Baroon dubbachuus amansiisus toopikii barbaade hoo ta'e amansiisus nama danda'udha. Ollaallee gosa adda addaa kan ta'ani Oromoo kan hin ta'in illee naannoo keenya jijjiru. Kanaaf isaan illee fira godhata tureeyyu gargaare. Kanaaf Baroo namni hin jaalanne hin jiru, jaalatamaa ture. Nama nagaa sammuu namaatiif kennu ture. Hojiinsaa yoo namatti illee in ulfaata ta'e akkaataatti salphisuuf itti beeka. Waan baay'eedha kan Baroo ani akkanatti dubbadhee toofixuu isinis Baro Institute hoggaa jettan kana waa'ee biyyaa hojjechuu keessan beeka. Inni biyya Baroon biyya tokko kanaaf waa'ee biyyaati kan hojjetamaa jiru. Wanni biyyaa kun immoo sabumaaf ta'a baay'een gammada. Kanarraa kanafee Baroon yeroo baay'ee namoota akkaataa itti ofitti qabu qaba. Warra qabeenya qaban maabaraan ofitti qabeetoo waa'ee Oromoo barsiisa. Bara san namni baay'een rakkina Oromoo keessatti hoo qabeenya qabaate keessa lixuu hin barbaadu. Inni garuu akkas godhee maabara godheetti dhimma Oromoo itti himee akka gargaaran goosisa tureeyyu. ID icaat warra Oromoodhaaf hojjetan ABO'dhaaf hojjetaniif ID icaat baasetti kenneefi amma hidhannootitti waa'ee hidhannoo amma hojjetanitti hojjechuu amma danda'anitti icaatiin hidhachiisna jedhanii meeshaa asiifachi akka fuudhanii too deeman goosisa tureyyuu embaasiiwwan dhaqnu sanillee informationii adda addaa gara alaatti nu erguu achi nu fiduu meeshaallee nuuf kennu turanii Barooni wajjin isaa dubbatameen dhumu akkuma isiniin jedhee garuu nama sammuunsaa baay'ee nagaa qabudha. Wajjin itti baay'atuyyuu rakkoon adda addaa isa mudatuyyuu hin dadhabu, hirriba hin dhabu, nama nagaa qabudha. Manni keenya yeroo baay'ee irbaata keenya yoggaa nyaannu misaa waanuma hundumarratti firri hiriyaanii namoonni Oromoodhaaf hojjetan hin dhufu. Manni guutuudha garuu mana nagaa ture. Kanaaf amma ayetuni baay'ee hojii baay'ee hojjettee ijoolleen teenya ejersaa naasisee ayetuni akkuma isinitti hime Oromoo baay'ee jaallatu achi keessa immoo ayetun baay'ee asiifachi deemtee Awurooppaa, Ameerikaa, Afrikaa dhaqxee biyya inni itti awwaalamellee geechee awwaala isaallee argitee uummata wajjiniin wal qabatanii bo'anii waan barbaachisaa ta'e piroogiraamii adda addaa qindeeffattee dhuftee kanaaf amma ishiin akka itti fuftee too dubbattuun carraa kennaafi. Ulfaadhaa waan asitti naaf feertaniif.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Like my mom, I will not be presenting in Afaan Oromo, unfortunately, sorry. But I really appreciate everything that you guys have done. My account and my perspective of my mother or my father is sourced from the research I conducted about his life and work for the purpose of documenting his history. Oh my God. And it's really to pass it down to the next generation. And as his daughter, it has been challenging to narrate the extent of his life to the fullest. I've been humbly concerned about the magnitude of his service and even sharing his history, possibly sounding exaggerated. His history almost sounds something out of an amazing book or something out of the movies. I did objectively interview his comrades, individuals that he disagrees with, that individuals who disagree with him, family, friends. Sorry, he's the only thing I get emotional about, and so I have a very short time to share with you something. So perhaps this is an appropriate platform to attempt and describe him within the proper weight that he carries. As you've established an institution in the name of Baro, it would be suitable to share with you an institution he also established for the Oromo people. So I titled my short remark from the visionary to the current, the 11th hour of the United Oromo struggle movement that we're at currently. Since day one, since the initial attempt of colonization, Oromo has always resisted and fought for freedom. And throughout the years, Oromo has earned many heroes who are incredible and with the magnitude of, many untold histories of their own. And we honor and respect and love them all equally as Baro. By no means do I mean that the Oromo struggle was his vision. No, but I definitely would say my research and findings of the life and contributions of Baro concludes that he is the visionary and the designer of the Oromo Liberation Front. The first united effort of the Oromo struggle movement, right, or Lafez, by far the most effective institution Oromo has had at its disposal. And the Oromo struggle has always been fought by brave Oromo sons and daughters. And Oromo never stopped resisting the various oppression of the Ethiopian government. But the reason why Baro is known as a unifier is as a result of his success to bring together the various localized movements which existed during his time, and including the one that he formed in Finfinne and around the area. And when I say he is the visionary of the Oromo Liberation Front, he organized, he started with cell groups. He organized various cell groups. My findings take me back all the way to 68, 69. During that cell group, the individuals who are still alive, Ababiya Bajober, the son of, I think, the king of Jumma, and Abiyu Galata, I think he's residing in Maryland. One of both of them are an incredible living legend of the Oromo, and they were at the initial cell group. And in fact, they called that cell group the Central Committee. And the various cell groups were conducting research, and they had conversations about the Oromo history and the current situation at the time. They engaged in studying various international movements. The name of the OLF itself was very much debated. Should it be liberation? Should it be a movement? Is it a front? What is the question of the Oromo? What do we ultimately desire as the outcome of the struggle? And by the end of 78, I guess before he passed away, I learned about close to 30 various cell groups that he had. And out of the cell group, OLF was finally designed in multifaceted manner. And out of that, a youth group called Waraga came out of that. Jal Daud Ibsa was one of the individuals in there, in that cell group. But Oda Chasa was in that. Hirut, a lady named Hirut, and I have all the documents. But anyways, and there were a few people, and someone that lives here in Georgia were also in there, and that was one cell group. And then another cell group, like I said, was the political aspect of it. They called it the Central Committee, and in the Central Committee, various people changed. Ababiya Bajober had to go abroad for education and come back. When he left, Magar Sabari was in there. various people coming in and out of, various sales. And Baro remained. And, whenever people will leave abroad, he will continue. He will begin he will organize a different cell group in high school and universities and in different areas. And of course, they had oil-left cadres that came out of the various cell groups and military. A lot of them, as I understood, were involved in logistical and cadre work, logistical work for the military. And so what came out of the cell group was, how should a political movement be created for Oromo? From awareness to an arms struggle to revolution, and to maintain the various structure that they built over time. And so Oromo obviously didn't know itself at the time very well, its identity was sort of almost hidden in certain areas. Some knew themselves as based on their religion, or others really identified as, they were accepting the Galla or the Kotu or whatever name that they called us by. And they had to teach. The oil-left military was uniquely designed to first teach the Oromo people about who they are, their identity. And then they needed to make them understand that, no, you're oppressed. And there is a need for the struggle. And this is the question for the movement. And this is how you assist the struggle. And so I really have a short time, but finally a declaration of the movement was to specifically free the Oromo people out of the colonial bondage of the Ethiopian Empire, and to gain self-governance of Oromia. And it was designed to fit with the type and the approach that Oromo needed, and oil-left needed to be. And for oil-left to flexibly maneuver based on a specific time, or to fit the evolving need of the Oromo nation, or the geopolitical situation of that empire, depending on the various governments that come along, and depending on what they do. So if you notice, a lot of oil-left representatives always mention this is the people's movement, is what they say. And it never made sense to me for a very long time. And they considered themselves as a vehicle or a train of the movement, and it needed to be the people's movement. But I will go in depth on another time, or nevertheless, his biography has been written and it's at a draft level. And I will make all my research available for whoever wants to write about him. A documentary has been prepared and it's not released because I just don't feel like the environment is suitable enough. When his children, the oil-left children, the military, the political wing, and all of them, I think when they have a complete control of the country, I feel like his name and what he really represents can be disseminated freely within Oromia. With the nature that the country is in, I learned that it's not possible to do anything for Baro. Even individuals, when I went to see his grave, individuals that used to go and visit his grave they gave me a list of names who were imprisoned. And the name itself, I think, ignites a thought of freedom and Oromo empowerment, and a need to struggle, and a need for unity. And that's a threat to the status quo of that country. And so eventually all of that will be available, though. It's already I've been gathering it since 2005. but one thing that I want to conclude with is on his last days, he mainly worked, of course, he was in Harar, and he worked in, he focused on the military mainly, and that's exclusively what he did. And he was training various small military and sending them to various parts of Oromia, and unsuccessfully. I hear that a lot of them kind of vanished, I think, early on in the 70s. But one thing I want to say, how he is a unifier and what he would desire right now. When before he died, of course he was shot, and he had time, and he wrote, and he said few things. And one of the things that he said was he did not want his death to play part as a divisive, I guess he didn't want it to be, he didn't want it to be a cause or a source of disagreement or division amongst the Oromo people. And he ultimately decided to sacrifice his life for the freedom of the Oromo, and regardless of the condition of his death. And as to how one a freedom fighter dies within the struggle or outside of the struggle, regardless, he knew he was going to sacrifice his life for the Oromo, and unity is his priority. And we all know that the government, the various government, whether it's Dirk, Haile Selassie, EPRDF, even now, they utilize our division as a tool. And I think he knew that early on. And that's also why he included the various movements, the localized movements that were around, to kind of like merge together with the one that he formed. And as a family, I remember my mother, we have forgiven for the sake of Oromo, whatever happened. I think we all have to focus on his legacy. He would want us to be united. He would want us to move forward. And I remember my mother saying that on a, to an Oromo audience, and that I would say that because I know that was the message that he passed on. There's a whole lot that I can say, but thank you for having me. Another day we'll talk about his contribution in land to the tiller and pharmacy, and at various stages to other nations and nationalities. But for now, I really have a short time, and thank you for having me, and have a blessed one.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Adewarke and Ade Ayetu, for sharing such a personal and inspiring perspective on the life and legacy of Baro Tumsa. We look forward to reading his biography and watching his documentary, and we hope that the conditions that you feel are most suitable for releasing them become our reality very soon. The original moderator, Marato Kitila, has now joined us, so I will hand over to her to do the rest of the moderating and say thank you for me, and hand over to Marato.
Thank you, Gatu, for filling in. I appreciate it. And thank you so much, Adewarke and Ayetu, for that really moving presentation. I would like to next welcome Professor Asafa Jadlata to present further on the life and legacy of Baro Tumsa. Asafa Jadlata is a professor of sociology and global and Africana studies at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. His teaching and research expertise focuses on the areas of global studies and world systems, sociology of development, social movements, nationalism, democracy, terrorism studies, indigenous studies, human rights, and critical race and ethnic studies. He has published and edited several books, book chapters, and refereed articles in national, regional, and international journals. Professor Jallata has recently published 3 books, namely The Oromo Movement and Imperial Politics, Ideology and Culture in Oromia and Ethiopia, another Cultural Capital and Prospectus for Democracy in Botswana and Ethiopia, and also Phases of Terrorism in the Age of Globalization, from Christopher Columbus to Osama bin Laden. Professor Asafa Jallata's refereed articles have been published in journals such as the Journal of Oromo Studies, Horn of Africa, Northeast Journal of African Studies Review, Journal of Pan-African Studies, International Journal of Comparative Sociology, Journal of Black Studies, Vital Issues, Journal of African American Speeches, Social Justice, Sociology Mind, Sociologists Without Borders, Humanity and Society, and the list goes on. Professor Asafa Jallata is extremely widely published. So I would like to give a warm welcome to you, Professor Asafa. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Marartu, for wonderful introduction. I'm going to use PowerPoint presentation. Okay. The title of my talk, my speech is Baro Tumsa's Leadership, a prophetic, pragmatic, and revolutionary approach. By the way, some of our discussion is going to overlap with the family perspective, because Ayetu and I are working on this project together. So some of our issues are overlap. How prophetic? Baro believed that the Oromo nation and Oromia can be liberated from Ethiopian settled colonialism and its Netanya government. As an organic intellectual, he understood the complexity of the Oromo national problem, why the Oromo needed national organizational leadership, and planned and facilitated the formation of the Oromo Liberation Front. The intellectual maturity of Baro and his colleagues was demonstrated by their critical understanding of the cumulative colonial experience of the Oromo and the ideology and the pragmatic modes of struggle they developed, rather than totally borrowing alien ideologies, although they extensively read Marxist and liberal literature. Baro focused on the development of national Oromuma, which means developing Oromo nationalism by retrieving Oromo national history and the culture. He had deep commitment, intellect, trustworthiness, pleasant demeanor, endless patience, persuasive ability, and the ability to understand complex human behaviors, to deal with individuals and groups by recognizing and respecting their idiosyncrasies. Baro was an effective listener, precise communicator, and mobilizer and organizer. Furthermore, he was a resourceful, far-sighted, pragmatic, and selfless national leader who intentionally and critically integrated Oromo political wisdom and philosophy with the best practice of leftist and liberal political traditions, philosophies, and practices. He believed that the Oromo should have their own independent liberation front that can mobilize and empower them to recreate their independent country and a free society. Baro was the first Oromo activist intellectual who clearly understood the Oromo national problem and acted to solve it. by facilitating the birth of OLF and by initiating the formulation of research-based policies for which this institute is established. Baro predicted that by rebuilding Oromo society through raising political consciousness, developing national Oromoma, and building the OLF, the Oromo nation can liberate itself and rebuild a sovereign democratic republic of Oromia, which can create a federal or confederal multinational democracy. While clandestine rebuilding the Oromo national movement, Baro facilitated the formation of legal political party called the Ethiopian Oppressed People's Struggle, or ICAT, to create a united front for all colonized nations within the Ethiopian Empire. In this effort, he brought together the elites of the colonized nations to openly and honestly dialogue, to formulate policies that would enable them to build a federal or confederal multinational democracy, to work together and solve their common political and economic problems. Baro believed in the liberation of all oppressed and exploited peoples by addressing the national and the class questions simultaneously. How pragmatic? Leadership can be defined in terms of activities, relationships, and strategic choices that are packaged into policy to mobilize and organize a category of people to achieve defined objectives. It involves intellectual directives and organizing activities. Critical political leaders develop theoretical, ideological, and organizational visions to identify and solve political and social problems. As an organic intellectual, Baro clearly understood the external and the internal enemies or challenges of Oromo society. He clandestinely mobilized and coordinated a few Oromo activists, students, and intellectuals to critically and authoritatively study the central problem of Oromo society. As a result, for the first time in Oromo history, Oromo organic intellectuals selected and coordinated by Baro produced a document known as the Oromo Voice Against Tyranny in 1971, which hinted the future direction of the Oromo national struggle. This document defined the central problem of the Oromo, which are Ethiopian settler colonialism and its Naftanya political structure. His strategies included creating networks of notable Oromo in the government, the army, business, religious institutions, and networks of ordinary Oromo from all walks of life. His down-to-earth relationship with many Oromo enabled him to build trust and respect with Oromo whom he knew. He also created secret study circles and studied all relevant literature, including history, revolutions, Marxism, Leninism. In his activities, Baro paid attention to the diversity of Oromo society and recruited members of all Oromo branches. Baro's charisma, his social and communication skills, his leadership ability, his capacity to build connections and delegate authority made him a magnetic and a far-sighted leader. He recognized the deficiencies of self-centered leaders and mentored many young Oromo to hold leadership in the Oromo national movement. His leadership qualities were impressive, and he was an effective listener and a speaker while dealing with people. He never promoted himself to seek fame, power, and wealth. Baro recognized that movement leaders, such as the OLF, perform 5 major tasks. 1, defining the objectives of the movement by establishing short and long-term goals. 2, providing the means of action. by identifying and channeling members' talents and energies effectively and by securing resources for the movement. 3, establishing and managing the structure and the cohesion of the organization through regulating tensions within the organization, dealing with adversary situations that may destabilize the movement, and controlling circulation of information. 4, expanding members, mobilizing members' support for the objectives of the movement by appealing to the interests of the collective identity of the movement. 5, building the collective identity of members, supporters, and sympathizers through invoking their collective memory to create a new understanding of current conditions and new vision of future possibilities. If you study his activities very carefully, the way he facilitated the birth of OLF and how he tried to build it shows all these 5 activities. He was Oromo-centric and genuinely democratic in his attempt to create Oromo national power, which cannot be controlled by external and internal reactionary forces. Baro both intellectually and practically refuted the theory of modernization and opposed progressive national social movement. He also rejected dogmatic Marxism-Leninism that most leftist scholars try to cut and paste to solve the political problem of the Ethiopian empire without critically studying and understanding the existing conditions. That's why he was challenging many organizations that were created from outside and inside in the Ethiopian empire. However, Baro critically learned from the positive liberal and Marxist contributions and practically integrated their best elements with Oromo democratic traditions known as the Gada system. That's why Baro was very unique. He had the capacity to assess major theories and also to understand Oromo history and the culture and integrate them the way they benefit the Oromo society. He critically and thoroughly understood the importance of Oromo collective grievances, Oromo collective identity formation, national consciousness, and the necessity of creating an independent Oromo national organization, which are prerequisites to recreate the sovereignty of Oromia and to build a free Oromo society. He recognized the relevance of using existing cultural and intellectual resources to mobilize and organize the Oromo nation for collective action. Consequently, he used the pre-existing civic institutions such as Machat Ulama, Oromo cultural renaissance that happened in Hararge, and the movement, the Bale Oromo armed struggle. He studied about all these existing situations integrated into the Oromo struggle. Understanding of Baro's political philosophy, his legal mind, his political pragmatism, his presentation of different political positions in different situations defies simple interpretation of his personality. And he demonstrated his intellectual complexity and the depth of his political thought process. By looking at the 2 scenarios, let me explain how Baro worked in the Ethiopian corrupt political system with a very limited political space and how he also worked with his colleagues clandestinely. He was working on 2 levels, on openly and clandestinely. Understanding the Ethiopian political system and the characteristics of the professors of the Haile Selassie First University, he wrote a thesis, he wrote a thesis for his law degree titled Decentralization and Nation Building in Ethiopia. He wrote this thesis in such a way that it could be accepted by the conservative university and at the same time would promote a political reform that can benefit his people and other oppressed peoples. While promoting reform, Baro was coordinating and organizing an underground Oromo intellectual group to study the condition of the Oromo people and to develop a political roadmap for the Oromo national movement. He brought together Oromo individuals of diverse backgrounds, such as students, intellectuals, business people, soldiers, army officers, administrators, farmers, religious leaders, and others who were separated from one another for many years geographically and mentally by Ethiopian colonial institutions. Baro established relationship with some Oromo in the Ethiopian armed forces and some Oromo members of the parliament. From different groups, he recruited and they started to form a clandestine study circuits and committees. How revolutionary. Baro sacrificed his profession, family, wealth, and the power